Health, healing, getting out of pain, and performing at your highest levels can be accomplished only when you understand yourself at a very deep level. You see, at Evolve, we preach that evolution of the body, mind, soul, and tribe, well, they're all interconnected and they're all interwoven. Today's guest is a doctor of physical therapy who takes a really unique approach to rehabilitation and performance training. Welcome to the Evolve Podcast. Evolve your body, evolve your mind, evolve your soul, and evolve your tribe. And now it's time to disrupt. And with that, folks, we want to welcome you to another episode of the Evolve Podcast. Joining us, returning from his surgery in Oberlin, Ohio, is the most interesting man that I know, W. Miles Riley. Welcome, Miles.
I am absolutely glad to be here, Steve. Absolutely glad to be here.
We're excited to have you back. You look light and free. You look like you're carrying less pain with you. I gotta say, the last few times we talked, I could feel the pain in your voice, and you just look so much different, so much more vibrant.
Well, I must admit, it was probably 5 days ago. You know, I had my sister here. She helped out. Then my son came. He helped out. And then when they both left, I was here by myself, and I was sitting there. And I just broke down in tears because I'm in no more pain.
Yeah.
I stood up and literally walked to the kitchen and realized I have no more pain. And I've been carrying this pain for 6-7 years.
Long time.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, it's good to have you back and good to hear that you are not in pain. And somewhere in the mountains of Utah, I am Steve Cutler. And guys, we are so fortunate tonight. Tonight's guest is Dr. Dani LaMartina, who's a doctor of physical therapy, a certified strength and conditioning specialist, and a nationally qualified women's physique competitor. Dani's also an elite powerlifter in the 123 class. She's the first to admit that she pushes the envelope when it comes to training, which uniquely allows her to blend principles of rehab and love of all things iron. Creativity, relationships, and trust drive her to empower coaches and athletes with tools and education from a PT who understands the training demands. Dani has a unique background as a clinician who has competed at the highest level in multiple sports and having done so amidst many trials. With years of clinical experience as a physical therapist, her involvement in the iron sports quickly led her to become one of the most trusted names in rehab among injured sport athletes across the country. As a coach, Dani works with a multitude of clients from both training and rehab, and she especially loves working with people who feel like their best might be behind them because she loves to transform and help people when they realize that there is better coming. Dr. Dani LaMartina, welcome to the Evolve Podcast. It's so great to have you.
Thank you for having me. I feel like that's like a conglomeration of many bios from across the internet. It's always funny coming on podcasts and you kind of hear the story of the footprint that you've made over time. And I think even since that has been updated, I've actually earned my pro card in bodybuilding and hit a higher ranking in powerlifting at the same time, while building the business and getting other people feeling good. It's cool to hear because you don't feel like you're making that much traction until you look back and realize, holy cow, just kidding. I definitely have.
Well, hey, that's what the Evolve Podcast is all about, is evolving into a better human being. And you've obviously evolved from this bio. That's exciting.
I sure
Well, we're really excited to have you today. And I know Miles had a topic that he wanted to kick it off with. And so because he is the recovering hip surgery and we've got a physical therapist on, Miles, why don't you kick us off?
Okay. So I've been playing with this idea, and it hit me when I was a personal trainer, that when somebody comes to you and they want to solve the problem of their eating or their fitness, they want to lose weight, they want to gain weight, whatever the issue is, they literally almost have to become another person. It's almost like an existential issue. because the person that got them to this particular point can't be the same person that's going to take them to this next level. And you said something, Steve, performing at your highest level. So as trainers, we have to create the idea of that person's better self. It happens as a musician. You know, I see it with the habits that I have as a musician, that to get to another level, I have to become another person, which literally means I have to kill the person who exists now. And I just wanted your idea, your feeling about that, because it's obvious you've trained so many people who come to you and they have to become something more to be more. So it's sort of an existential issue, if that makes any sense.
It totally does. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, there's so many directions that we could take this conversation, which is really cool. You know, I think in hearing your ideas, which is an awesome idea, by the way, I think there are two major ways that I love to think about this, because anytime a client starts to work with me again, I tend to kind of collect these people who have had a failed experience with another PT or another coach. And they kind of say, I need like the person that's going to figure out how to fix all the things. And at that point, I kind of give them two options without them really knowing it. It's whatever habits have gotten them to where they are either serving them or they're not.
Right.
And they can either take that and find almost like a positive about it, that those experiences have showed them something that they need to change or where they need to grow, or they can take it as a negative, is that it's almost like my husband said it really well the other day. Sometimes when things hurt, it's a good thing because they encourage you or they kind of push you to do something different. Right. And so there's like there's the distress versus the eustress approach if you're into the psychological part of things, which is also getting very essential. And so I think that, you know, where we take things with people, whether we take it into that eustress, meaning this was stressful, but it was a good kind of learning experience, here's how we're going to go forward, versus the distress of a basically a negative experience. I think a lot depends on the individual. And I'm sure you guys have worked with people in the past as well, who, whether it's in business, in fitness, in music, which you mentioned, I saw you rocking out earlier on the intro. I was like, yeah, I get it, Miles. So I think when you meet someone right away, the first time you talk to them, you know, like they've got that thing, or they kind of have that ho-hum. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the differentiating factor that, I mean, at least for me, kind of steers the boat just a little bit. But I mean, even along with that, I think we need to address the idea of whether or not it's a fixed belief that they can change or that they can grow, because a lot of people don't think they can.
And yeah. It's all the triggers. It's interesting because I used to tell clients all the time, you know, on any given day, I spend an hour with you. When you leave, there's 23 hours of the outside world that if I can't impress upon you, for you to stay with me, at least let me stay in your head, that the other 23 hours you are going to be subjected to the rest of the world, all your bad habits and triggers. And so we used to try to come up with systems and ideas of creating brand new triggers. And sometimes it failed and sometimes it worked. It worked. More often than not, it would fail. And that's when you start to figure out, okay, I need other resources to get through this person, so they get to see that the thing that they dislike the most is the thing they want to change. So we got to create a new you, or at least the idea of a new you, since that new you doesn't exist right now. So we have to create the idea of you and have you adopt that idea. And as PTs, we can see that the person possesses the potential to do it, but it's like an energetic shift. Yeah. How do we shift that energy so that they can embody it and go, oh, I can do this. So when you start building things smaller, you know, when you start building things step by step in manageable bites, you're more likely to have success. But it took me a while to understand that.
Yeah. I think the hard thing too is that if you're someone who sees the best in people, oftentimes, and I see this in a lot of my other PT clinician friends, as well as in personal training friends, we always want people's goals for them more than they want it for themselves. Not always, often. We want better for them more than they want it. And I think that's a big challenge. But a phrase that my dad actually uses that's really kind of stuck with me is that inertia requires intent.
Ooh,
And
I like
that
that.
phrase, you like that, right?
That is cool.
I was like, dang, Dad, that was a big one. But that's something that I've given to a lot of my clients, where when they check in with me weekly, if they've had, maybe they've had a hard time really getting to where they want to go. They've said they want to grow. They've said they want to do X, Y, and Z. They said they want their life to look a different way. And the best thing that I can remind them to do is that, look, your life is going to be what you create it to be. And our thoughts, the very way we think about things, changes our neurochemistry.
Yeah.
If you want to change that, if you want to become something more, you have to have the intent. And sometimes the only thing we can control are our thoughts, very often. That's a very powerful thing too, especially on the neurochemical level. I'm blown away by some of the neuroscience that's coming out with this. I can't keep up with it, but it's empowering. It's empowering to know that we change our thoughts, our chemistry changes.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. It's pretty powerful stuff. And that was one of the things, Dani, I think when you and I initially talked, I fell in love with our conversation. I mean, it was so much fun. I went home that night. I was telling my wife about our conversation, because I think that the way you start things out and the way that you approach things essentially comes from that mindset standpoint. You try to determine where people are at the beginning. I have to tell just a quick side story to that. I went home. I told my wife, I said, hey, I'm really excited. We've got this. My wife's name's Danielle. And I said, we've got another Dani coming on. And I said, look at her shoulders, look at her back. And my wife looked at your pictures and she goes, well, yeah, but she's really pretty. Oh, she's a really pretty girl. So anyway, Dani thinks that Dani is pretty. And your back, like I want your back and shoulders. That is just, it's unbelievable. The work that you put in is unbelievable. But that aside, your mindset when it comes to coaching your clients and helping your patients to heal and to get to that higher level of performance, you do things a little bit different than what I think a lot of people do, because I've been to physical therapists before when I've been injured, and there's a pretty rote program that you go through. If you have a knee issue, if you have a hip issue, or you have a shoulder issue, whatever it is, it's pretty much by the book. You could, throw a dart and you're going to hit the program. And your methodology is a little bit different. Can you walk our listeners through, when someone comes to you, what are some of the first steps that you go through?
This is a, oh my gosh, how long, I love what I do. Where to start? So I kind of fell into this by happenstance. I did not graduate PT school thinking I want to work with weightlifting athletes. I want to work in the gym. That was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to go work in an orthopedic outpatient clinic. I had amazing clinical mentors before PT school. I wanted to go back and work with them and just spend 25 years there. But at the time I was competing in powerlifting, and that was kind of my primary sport. And I was also, I think there were maybe like 2 or 3 other PTs within kind of that community across the country who really actually understood competing. And as an athlete, when something comes up and you go, down the street to your local PT, like the clinic where it's working, it's kind of like, okay, let's have you hop on the bike in the corner over there, and then you do some leg lifts, some side-lying abductions, maybe some clamshells. And when you're trying to squat 700-800 pounds, like these guys are, that's not going to cut it. And so they needed to work with someone who was actually going to understand their sport demand, and didn't meet them with a dichotomy of here's a TheraBand or you're never going to squat again. And it was very often kind of one or the other. And so really what I do is, I really want to say it's not that fancy. I just take a lot of the science behind best clinical practices and I apply it to people who just have increased their threshold a little bit. If that makes any sense. So, post hip surgery, if someone's doing squats and lunges to rehab a hip, why don't we look at the mechanics and just get them really strong at squats and lunges for certain things? And so obviously that's a much more simple approach. I love to get really, really nerdy about the 3-dimensional biomechanics and a lot of the principles that go into how our nervous system interprets the signals that we get and why it dictates certain muscular output, things like that. I'm a big biomechanics nerd, but really what I do is just kind of I tend to collect athletes who have had a not great experience and just want to give them a little bit of hope, especially maybe they think their last big squats behind them, or think their last big bench is behind them, or maybe I'm done competing, but I just want to be able to play with my kid on the floor. or I want to be able to go ride a bike with my wife when we're on vacation. And I think I just got off on a little tangent. I just want people to have hope. And I think very often when you experience something that confirms a narrative that, I'm gonna back up. I think a lot of our experiences either confirm or deny the belief system that we have. And very often our brain is going to seek confirmation of the current belief system.
Yep.
And so if you're hurting, if you have something going on, if you're not sure where you're going to be, what you're going to be able to do, with regards to capability, not just with like physical ability, but let's go with business ventures, let's go with your relationships, let's go with anything. Your experiences are going to confirm that belief system, unless you take the inertia and the intent to generate the inertia to start to believe something else and really seek that out, if that makes sense.
Well, it's pretty fascinating when you think about that. Everything, and I'm like you, I love the biomechanics of it. Early on, as I was studying, I learned that obviously, like everybody does in basic biology and physiology, that the nervous system is driven and by the brain, right? Everything we do has to start from the brain, and that is the primary driver of the central nervous system. So, if you're not focused on the right things, the right intent, the right way to do something, then you're not going to be able to get the results that you need to. Because if we're talking about physical movement starts by getting the muscles firing the right way in certain movement patterns. And so starting with the mind is a really important piece. How do you assess where somebody is at mentally before you start to work with them physically?
I have a very thorough, I work purely remotely right now, which is wild. If anyone had asked if I was going to be doing this years ago, even, I'm like, really? No way. I have a very long intake form, and I usually get on a call with people. And again, I had some great mentoring prior to PT school. I didn't think I wanted to be a PT, because I saw, you're walking down the street, everyone gets a bike, everyone gets taken through a couple exercises by a PTA, ice pack, they're out.
Yep.
But this clinic really changed how I viewed the ability to walk a healing process with someone. And in order to walk that healing process, because the brain and the body are so connected, it's so important, as we've mentioned, to kind of understand that mindset. So I have a pretty long intake, and I get on a call, and I think the thing that I really love to do is just actually listen and be willing to ask the one question that you think needs to be asked, even if it's uncomfortable. Do you think your best is actually behind you? Or, maybe there's a different one for that particular person, but I tend to.
That just gave me chills.
Yeah.
I literally felt like, I mean, I'm 64 years old, and I just said, is my best behind me? I literally got chills. Like, I need to sit down and play with that a little bit more. Like,
yeah.
That was just like a cold breeze just came through my apartment.
Well, Maz, I'm not gonna lie, you came on the call tonight and you have this like glow about you. I really don't think your best is behind you. I'm just gonna say it.
There is no way it is. There's no way it is.
Honestly, physically I live like my best is not behind me. But I've never heard it framed that way. It was how you framed it that made me, it just gave me pause. Like,
I think people don't realize they're chewing on it. I don't think people, I think people do not realize that they're thinking about that in the background, that's kind of the background noise of what's going on every day in their life. Have I reached my peak in anything?
I think you know what? I'm going to throw this out there, because as soon as you said that and Steven said something and it triggered this idea in me. I think on a grand scale, without us realizing it, we are still playing out the battle between Newtonian physics, classical physics, and quantum physics.
Yes, 100%.
Classical physics, Newtonian physics deals with matter, the solidity of matter. And we are talking about fixed mindsets. And quantum physics deals with everything is alive and possibilities are infinite. That things have an energy, that when they discovered that light wasn't just a particle, that it was a wave, and that it had this length and depth about it. And when I listen to people talk, I had a great conversation with this woman in the supermarket today. we were just waiting.
You
And
adopt me. I love you.
and she was complaining about something, and it was obvious she was a right-wing conservative and I'm a left-wing liberal, but we started talking about these things, and every idea that came out of her mouth was a fixed idea about people, a fixed idea about the government, fixed ideas. And rather than battle her, I tried to like soften her stance so she can see that these ideas that she had were not fixed. And so when people come to the gym, they have this idea of like, I'm fixed. This is me. And people who like us understand, no, we're going to play with some quantum things that you're not fixed. That you can rewire your brain. You can fire. You can create new neural pathways to create a brand new person that can trigger like dormant genes.
Yeah.
And that blows people's minds, and it's hard for them to grasp, because if you have a fixed mindset or a fixed life, that just sounds like voodoo to you.
Yeah. There is a massive difference there. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be fully transparent. This is something that I've really had a hard time with. And I'm very lucky that I've had people in my life to kind of kick me in the butt and like move me forward. My traditional mindset, just with growing up and all the experiences that I had, was very safety oriented, which when you're hardwired for safety and survival, that is fixed.
Yeah.
And my best friend is she's the most forward-moving person I've ever known in my entire life. I mean, like, she's all about like, you create your vibe, you create your energy. And to someone who didn't grow up that way, and who even as an adult, I just turned 35, and I'm like, this is all new to me. Like, I'm figuring out how to do this. It sounded like voodoo. You're so right. And just hearing someone talk about it, I kind of was like, people actually live this way. That's wild. But really starting to embrace it, it really is crazy how much different the world can look when you're outside of that belief system.
Yeah.
It's so simple when you say it. People are like, yeah, of course, Dani, you think differently, the world looks a little different. But when you really live it, you're like, wow, that's Technicolor.
Yeah.
It really expands your mind when you do open up to those different ideas. I mean, because like you were talking about, Dani, that you may not have stayed in or gotten into physical therapy if you would have only been exposed to the old way of doing things. Anybody that's been to physical therapy before knows what it is, right? The bike, the bands, a couple of things, ice pack, stem, now you're gone, right? And that's boring, and it doesn't work, quite frankly. We know that it doesn't work. The funny thing is we stick to these beliefs and we stick to these concepts. And, you know, what Miles is talking about with Newtonian versus the quantum side of things, it can sound to a lot of people like this is just woo-woo stuff. But Einstein's theory of relativity versus, you know, Newtonian time, they're totally different. I mean, time is relative. That's been proven. And what I teach people when I'm out lecturing to companies is that as a leader, you have to understand that time is relative to your focus and your energy that you put into something. And so if you, you know, I mean, you could sit there and have an instance where it flies by, or you could have an instance that takes forever. And it's all relative to the focus and the energy that you have. Yeah. Dani, I know one of the things that you really focus on with clients is helping them to understand that the future is different than what their belief of the past was. When you get a client and you ask that question of, you know, do you believe that your past is behind you, or your best is behind you? What's the first thing that you do if the answer is yes, I do. Yes, I think I'm injured and I can't, you know, squat more, or I can't deadlift more. What do you do to start to unravel that?
You know how sometimes they'll kind of like coerce a toddler into doing something they don't realize they're doing it.
Yeah. Miles does that to me all the time.
I thought you did that to me.
Yeah,
that's why we're good friends. We do it to each other.
No, that's a really good question. You know, so I think about this from two different perspectives, right? There's the psychological kind of human, very compassionate perspective where I never want someone to set the bar too low for themselves. That's the kind of thing that really changes people's lives. And actually, my coach mentor, Justin Harris, was on here with you a couple months ago.
Yep.
And he's someone who really raises the bar and just believes in you in a way that you didn't know you could believe in. And I think it's really important that in leadership, we do that for people. And anytime you're in a role where you're directing any part of anyone's life, even in your tribe, as an equal, there's still an element of leadership there.
Yeah.
And so from the psychological kind of compassionate component, I think it's really important to acknowledge that wound, right? That they're dealing with, that they may think something's behind them. You can't leave that pain point unacknowledged. I don't think you can anyway. But from there, it's kind of a question of then you go into the technical side. And I think that's where it becomes really fun to kind of play the game of, well, where's their capability? Where's their threshold? What's their capacity? Like on a raw scale, but then you also have to layer beliefs on top of it. And so there's some really sneaky things that you can do just with regards to how a program, for example, is put together, where people aren't going to realize what they're doing until all of a sudden they look back and they're like, wow, I just literally did the thing I told you I was never going to do. And I was like, yeah, I know.
That's awesome. It almost feels like voodoo to them. It happened, but they don't really know that. I want to unpack something that you just said when you talk about that you need to acknowledge the wound. People don't recognize that if they have a belief that's limiting them, that limiting belief is almost like a scar. It is a wound that needs to be understood first and foremost and acknowledged in order to move on from that. What a profound thought that is.
I'm chewing on that one for a while because that scar is, I'm going to, again, kind of come back to the brain and the body and how those things are connected. And that's funny. I get onto podcasts often, and I really love the technical side of things, but for some reason, we always end up talking about kind of the more psychological components. And I think that's because at the end of the day, people are people. And if you can't walk alongside someone's belief system, the chances that you're going to be able to drive an outcome that's favorable in a direction beyond what they would have imagined for themselves is very, very small.
That's really interesting what you just said. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Walk alongside somebody's belief system.
Because it helps you to understand where what their perspective is. Yeah. I think that's it's a very powerful piece. After you've seen that and you've recognized it, what's the next step typically?
On a very practical level, definitely reverse engineering the goals. And again, looking at what they can do. Okay, and what's the next smallest step you can take? I think it's just like anything. And the three of us were talking before the podcast started, and we kind of chuckled about how, at least in my world of fitness, I think that, physical training is of some value, but that physical training really cultivates a change in the heart and the mind and the soul. And just like in any other area of growth, you want to be looking for, okay, here's my capacity, here's my threshold. What's the smallest step forward I can take? And if we could take that small step forward and actually make a little web out of it in multiple regions, from the PT world, I'm going to look at motor control, range of motion, strength, flexibility, whatever, power production. But on a belief system level, those things have to be matched as well. Right. So I think that's really where, Steve, you asked me earlier, how do I do what I do? And I think it's really just kind of really trying to be compassionate and soft towards people and understanding that anyone who's dealt with something heavy, you guys have felt heavy things. And you know what it's like when someone actually acknowledges you're in that. It's a lot easier to kind of say, okay, I'm safe here. And when you feel that kind of partnership and that kind of, okay, I'm safe here, I think that's step one to moving forward in almost anything. It's really hard to encourage someone to grow if they don't first feel like they're in a situation or in a team or partnership where that can be fostered.
And it's interesting you use the word safe. I'm going to play with that a little bit because I'm going to say something that's literally weaved into that, just coming from the perspective of as an artist. And Steve will understand this too, as a painter. Years ago, when I was playing with being a stand-up comic, I'd noticed I'd get an idea in my head. And in my head, it's full blown, it's got its emotion, it's got its rhythms. But when I would write it down, all of that was gone. And I was looking at these words and I'd look at the words and go, that just looks that's just stupid.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't capture,
Yeah.
So when you say things like creating a safe space, one of the things is that compounds this wound that we're talking about. What compounds it is whenever you're taking a step in a direction that you want to go in, you have to invest that step with energy.
Yes.
Energy is so key to this. So how do you applaud? How do you get somebody to applaud full energy and appreciate that first baby step they take so they can keep adding energy to each step as they build? And it's hard sometimes when you're alone, because when you're alone, you're basically with your negative self. And if you don't know how to build energy with each step, it's very hard to do.
Yeah,
There's
I think
a lot.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's an interesting point, and I think that there's got to be some compassion in there to taking those steps. And Dani, you mentioned something earlier about where you reverse engineer the goals based on what their capacity is. One of the biggest challenges, though, I think, is that when people are in pain, they have a really hard time understanding what their capacity is. I mean, if I could deadlift, like you were saying, if you could deadlift or squat, 600-700 pounds before, and then you get injured and you can't even bend over to tie your shoes, what is the capacity? What is, what can you get back to? That's a really hard thing for people to reverse engineer on their own. So how do you bring hope to that?
I'm going to share a little bit of my story here because I think it adds a little bit of credibility. People often assume that they see me walk into a gym and they're like, oh, she's probably just been doing this forever. It came super easily to her. There's been no problems. Quite the opposite. So big picture, a couple years ago, I had a really big injury. They kind of said, we don't know what to do with this. We can't reattach it. And this is at the time I was ranked second in the country in my weight class for powerlifting,
wow.
Whole country. I was top 10 in the world. So this is a really big part of my identity. And not only that, as a clinician, when you sustain an injury like that, you kind of go through this little bit of imposter syndrome of, am I as good as I think I am? Can I fix this? And going through the literature and talking to surgeons, everyone kind of said, we don't know what to tell you, good luck. I was like, okay, no problem. I'll figure it out, and kind of figured it out. As soon as I got back into training, I started to have some medical issues where we're still kind of figuring out what's going on. But I had a really pretty significant seizure episode along with some really weird CNS complications that for a couple months, it made it really hard for me to walk.
Wow.
So over the course of about 2 years, I went from being one of the best in the world, one of the strongest women in my weight class, in current, to not being able to fix myself a meal in the kitchen.
Wow.
My husband had to help me with things. I mean, getting upstairs to brush my teeth was a big deal. And at that point, that's when I thought my best was behind me, which is dumb. I was maybe 30, 29. But you get to a point where you kind of wonder, well, these are two really big things. Doctors still know what's going on. I still have days where I can't feel my legs. What are we doing? And so when I tell people my story and I tell people that you have to understand your capacity first, I say it with the conviction of having been there. I'm not some, PT who sat there and read a bunch of articles and just decided one day she was going to go deadlift and everything was easy.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of internal struggle that's had to figure out what to do with that. Since starting to kind of come back from that, when I let go of holding on to things so tightly that it felt fragile. There's a great analogy for this, actually, I was reading the other day. Have you ever seen a kid who maybe wants to have a firefly inside a jar? There's something inside a jar that they want to grab and pull their hand out, but their hand gets stuck. And you're like, homie, you just let go and pull your hand out. We can have and you can have both and fill it with something better.
Yeah.
I was that kid hanging on to my athletic performance and clinical identity, trying to pull my hand out of the jar. And when I finally let go was when things started to, it was mind-blowing. But after that point was when I did my first bodybuilding show. I then turned pro. My second show, I put up a better total and a better Wilks, out squatted myself previously when all the physicians basically told me, girl, you're really lucky to take 135 in your squat again. I took almost 400 pounds after that.
Wow.
So when I speak my story, when I talk to people who feel like they're not sure what they don't know. big gray area in front of them. And the compassion is there because I have suffered within that. I've been in that spot where you have no idea what the next step forward looks like. And the only option you have is to either keep moving forward or accept where you are. And as much as I believe in compassion, I think the compassion often comes down to not coddling people either and saying, look, like, if you want to stay here, that's fine. That's your choice. But it's a choice. And I'm maybe a little bit of a stickler on that with a lot of my clients, and that I don't allow them to stay. I don't allow them to stay there. If they want to stay there, my roster is very limited. They can probably find another PT to work with. My retention rate is very high.
So. Yeah, because that must be a hard pill to swallow as a client. That just sounds like a hard pill to swallow, is because, one, just the mere fact that I'm with you suggests that there's at least a small part of me that believes my best is in front of me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if I'm faced with the choice of, if I'm faced with the choice of you telling me, like, look, you can stay here. You can stay here. But underneath it, it defeats why you're here with me. So we've got a little conundrum going on here.
Exactly.
Right. So you have to make up your mind. But if this is where you think you are the safest and you don't want to go further, then I got to kind of let you go, because the pure fact that you're with me suggests otherwise.
Yeah. But people have to realize that for themselves. People have to realize that. They have to realize they believe things can be better.
Yeah.
Like, they have to realize that that's there. You can't tell them, like, well, if you didn't think this was better, you wouldn't be here with me. I mean, you can, but it just sparks a little something different. It kind of sparks that, like, whatever that is, and that human part of us that has that fire behind us.
Yeah.
I think when they believe that, that's when things really move forward.
Yeah, there's got to be some sort of disruption, because the physical manifestation of them showing up is different than the manifestation. Beautiful. Miles showing off his disrupt shirt. But it's different than the the mental manifestation of how they're showing up. And I think that there oftentimes is this massive dichotomy that we have between what we tell ourselves and then what we're doing. And I absolutely love and appreciate your story and the challenges that you've been through. And I really respect and honor what you've been through, and the fact that you're not just teaching this, but you're living it, and that you've been through that, those challenges. But it also speaks, Dani, to this idea that we really don't know what's in front of us. And if we think that the best is behind us, there's nothing truthful about that. I mean, we can live in crescendo if we choose to, right? Every part of it is a choice.
Great phrase. Live in crescendo. I love that.
What did that look like for you? Talk a little bit about, as you were going through some of these dark moments, how did you continue to push forward and
so this is actually something that Miles, I think you were mentioning earlier. At what point, like, how do we, in those small steps, how do we, like, find enough momentum in those small steps?
Yeah.
And I think this comes back to a really great point. And this is something that my husband has been hugely influential. He is the most just, like, steady bass drum of a person. It's great for someone like me who's all over the place. But one of the things that I really, really have loved just watching him do is that, have you ever seen someone, like, go so all out on something and then just kind of crash afterwards?
Yeah, for sure.
I think sometimes when people are trying to create something new, they put so much energy into, like, hyping themselves up to do it that they don't really actually have the energy to do the thing. So sometimes it's almost a game of, like, managing it, but this is going to sound really weird, like managing energy reserves. So I'll just give this example. It's an easy one. Dave is really, really strong. We were training in powerlifting gym. Gosh, this is probably like 8 or 10 years ago now. No, 6, anyway, a while ago. And he'd do, really heavy set of, like, 6 or 8 squats, and people get, like, really, really fired up. And he was like, guys, chill. I got 4 more sets of this. Which, if you think about it, I think that's a really great approach to taking some of these small steps. The more you amp yourself up, even, like, the idea of creating, like, big energy, there's a difference between inherently believing that you can take steps forward, even if it's a little bit of honest, real, authentic belief, I think is far superior than trying to, like, internally bloat yourself with I don't know if that makes sense. So
Oh,
I
totally.
think
I really am resonating with what you're saying. Years ago, I used to have to amp myself up to go do things. And then as I got better at doing whatever that was, I didn't have to amp myself up anymore. It was almost like I had to build up this energy, puff up the ego a little bit to just go try something. Whereas now I look at something that I don't know how to do well, and I'm like, well, I suck at that. But if I could take a step in the right direction, then I'm going to get a little bit better. And that's actually better energy for me than this whole, fluff myself with a bunch of motivation. Yeah.
There's a phrase that I've been hanging on to lately. It's stay in it. Whatever you're doing.
Oh, I like that.
Stay in it.
Yeah.
So like I'm getting ready to start contest prep soon, and every day, the day as you get closer to the show, you kind of start looking forward to your one rice cake a couple times a day. Yeah. No, I'm not kidding.
Oh, I know you're not.
Yeah, I've been there.
You have a choice to go to your pantry and not delay gratification. Like basically, like the idea of being able to delay gratification is the big thing. And at any given point, you can choose the easy way, or you can stay in it. You can stay in the process. You can stay in the hard moment. And I think whether it's rehab, training, business ventures, relationships, marriages, I mean, anything, like they all require the ability, the staying power to stay in it. And so I think especially in some of I hate talking about my story because it sounds like super cheesy. I actually I don't talk about it a lot. A lot of people don't know about it. But I think just the ability to, if it means something to you, then your actions should align with the value they place on it. And that's just kind of an integrity thing, I think. But
that's not cheesy at all.
Yeah,
it's really not.
I'm with Miles.
Some of the most, you know what it is I think, when you look at our society, and it's funny because it's going to be a paradox. People overthink, but yet they don't think.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
And and we're so busy looking for, the more complex thing. I remember just trying to play piano years ago. It was the most complex thing, and it was so complex that it stopped me from just going and sitting down and learning how to fucking do it.
Yeah.
And once I sat down and started playing and started learning how to do things, I just thought I should have wasted a fucking lot of time thinking about how hard this is and how complex it is. And so when you say something, what you just said, it's oftentimes doing is that simple.
There's a big part of, I can't remember what I was reading, but it talked a lot about anxiety around events or anxiety around like a project or a task or anything. And the biggest thing you can do to reduce the anxiety of procrastination is something, literally anything.
Yeah.
And I think it's because it's just the locus of control. And again, with what I do, being able to give a little bit of control back to people over their day and over their pain so that the pain's not driving the bus is that's a big thing.
Well, I think a couple of things, Danny, I want to unpack there. I mean, you talk about that you feel a little bit uncomfortable talking about your story because it might sound cheesy, but the reality is that's your story. That's your truth, right? And but I can also resonate with that because like you, I've been through some different struggles and challenges over the years where I look at it and I've hesitated to talk about those things. I've hesitated because I don't want to put it out there and, bang my chest. I'm not the guy that's like, look at me, look at me. I tend to be fairly, yeah, right. I tend to be fairly pragmatic. And my message over the years has been, if I'm talking about a story of an experience that I've been through, it's just because that's my life. I've lived it and I can experience it. And I don't know anybody else's stories as well as I know mine, but I also don't want to be the guy that's just, jumping out there, looking at me, I'm the best type of thing. So I can definitely resonate with that. But at the same time, it's a really powerful story. And I think something that people can empathize with. And I think that there are a lot of people who are in that pain or who have been through that pain that say, wow, I can empathize with her. And it is great to know that there's a coach out there that's really been through some shit and that knows how to deal with that, not just theoretically.
The other thing is, if cheesy equates to your accomplishments, it can be fucking cheesy any day now. Put some more cheese. Can I get extra cheese on that?
Extra cheese, baby. I want to go back to something you said earlier with delayed gratification, because I think that there is, we talk about delayed gratification, I think, in the health and fitness space, often about the eating something right now that might not be health promoting as much as it is, just enjoyable, right? And I don't think there's good or bad foods, but I think that there are things that help to get us towards our goals, and there are things that probably move us in the opposite direction. So the delayed gratification concept we talk about quite a bit in nutrition, but I want to take it back to this idea of taking steps in the right direction versus just trying to make ourselves feel good in the moment. We live in a society that is structured around these consistent dopaminergic hits where we're trying to get gratification. And sometimes that's in this idea of, I need to have hope so that I can move forward in my progression away from my injury or whatever it is. But yet, if we just take a step in the right direction, we are truly delaying that gratification. If Miles, we were talking about this earlier, Miles came out of hip surgery and he starts doing the squats and he starts going for walks and he starts doing the lunges. I don't know that if he sat there and just built himself up to make himself feel better in that moment, if that would be as powerful in the long run as if he just started doing what he did, which is, okay, I'm going to start walking. I'm going to start squatting, because he's delaying the gratification of feeling good in the moment and feeling motivated. We're actually doing the shit that's going to make him feel better in the long run, right? So talk a little bit more from a psychological standpoint. When you're working with people, how do you help people to delay gratification so that they can have real results over time?
I think there's meaning behind the gratification. Like, I think when people want this, at least the people that work with me, usually if there's the gratification is tied to something important to that person. And usually it is something along the lines of identity role confusion, which, if you're familiar with that idea, it's kind of the phrase of you are not what you do.
Yeah.
But a lot of people come and start to identify with you are what you do. And so when you start to remove that ability, they no longer know what they do. And they will take any chance they can to jump at that, to kind of reclaim that part of their identity. Well, really, it may physically not be in their best interest. Let's say, for example, someone tears a hamstring and they feel really good and they say, I want to go have another deadlift day, and they end up, re-tearing it. Because they're so antsy to get back to that part of themselves that they feel most capable of. And I think at the end of the day, so many people just want to be capable. And I think a lot of people will find their fixes throughout the day that make them feel like they can be the partial superhero they want to be to get through their day. I think we all need a little bit of that.
Yeah.
So with regards to delaying gratification, I'm really, really lucky. So many of my people are just really honest with me. They're very open with their dialogue. And I think that that's probably one of the bigger parts of coaching, and that the science of the PT and the science of the training, the science, all that that can be applied to a lot of different things. And I think what really sets apart a great coach or a great clinician is the conversations they can have. And when you can find out what that I'm going to call it a temptation, but that's a really bad word for it. But that temptation to want to kind of jump back onto that thing rather than delaying gratification, when you can find out why and what that means to someone, again, that's an acknowledgement. And when people feel acknowledged, that thing they're trying to hang on to feels a lot less fragile. And I think that's a big way to kind of walk alongside people. But yeah.
Great point. Great perspective. I never really thought about it like that, there's something deeper, whatever that temptation is or whatever the gratification is that they're going after, there's something deeper. And I think if you understand what that deeper aspect is, then that's where the healing can come. I want to shift gears just a little bit, Dani. We were talking before we started the recording about Miles' progression from his hip surgery, and you brought something up that I thought was really fascinating relative to him getting in the stairs and working through some stairs. So, Miles, if you want to walk through what you were talking about, and then I'd love to get your perspective on this, Dani, because you mentioned that there is a huge psychological component to how the body functions.
Oh, you mean when just trying to climb the steps?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we went out today, and there are 7 steps in my apartment to get to the ground level. And I put my leg up on, and it felt like I had the strength to do it. But that strength was minimal compared to what was going on in my mind of thinking that I could snap or break the prosthetic, that I could actually hurt it. And so when I stepped, it didn't feel physical. It felt psychological. And the guy, the PT, physical therapist to me, he said, I'm not going to force you to do it. He said, but I can tell by what you've been doing since we've been together, you're strong enough to do it. It's more psychological. And so we have to still, we'll build. When you get to the actual clinic, they have steps that are half the size and you can build towards that. He said, you'll probably do it in a day. But right now, that's just psychological.
So why is so much of this psychological then? Walk us through it.
Well, I want to know, how does that make you feel? Like when he said it was psychological, because I think some people hear that and they hear, oh, it's all in my head and it's a negative thing. But I would have a different approach. I would just, I'm really curious. How did you feel hearing that?
It was a weird feeling in a sense that it's always interesting when somebody sees more of you than you see of yourself.
So those are big words right there.
Yeah. He saw more because, he's been working with me for 2 weeks. He had me, like I said, he saw me doing the squats. He saw me doing the lunges. He had me doing kicks. So he witnessed all of the different components of my rehabilitation. And so I guess in his mind, he summed it up to the stairs should be easy. And when I tried to do the stair, I put a little pressure on. I said, I don't think I'm really ready for that. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And what was wonderful about him is that there was something about his manner. He didn't come off like a drill sergeant. You can do this. Come on, you. It was almost stated in a matter of fact way. He said, you could do this, but it is psychological. And I've watched you do the other things. I'm not going to force you to do it. We'll build you to it because once we get to the clinic, you'll see we've got the half steps and you can build up to it and it'll take you a day to get there, but you can do that. And you could do that. It didn't have the undertone of a challenge where I was going to look at him and go, fuck you, I'm doing this. It was just, and I felt comfortable with, okay, let's go to the clinic.
Did you feel seen?
What's that?
It almost sounds like you felt like seen in a way.
Yeah, I felt seen. Yeah. Yeah, he honored what I was going through. And the cool thing about it is, now that we're unpacking this, the cool thing about it was there was no time constraint with him. He realized like, oh, in another week you'll be fine. So, it's like, it's almost as if he had no sense of time. It was like, okay, you know what? We'll do this. You could do this, but I'm not going to force you because next week you'll be in the clinic and you've got the little stairs and you'll build up to it and you'll be fine there. So there was no urgency, no drill sergeant. And, it psychologically, it actually felt kind of comforting.
I was going to say, it sounds like it put you at ease.
Yeah, it put me at ease. And, in me, where, Steve and I talk about this all the time, I'm always aware of when my ego gets in the way. I practiced that a long time with having a son, when to let go, when to let go. It's like, you won this war. This is fine. I didn't feel pressed in my mind, my ego, to go like, come on, you could do this, because the way he framed it is, next week we'll get this.
Yeah.
And next week there'll be progress. So there was nothing precedent. So I felt seen, felt comfortable, and also felt this is going to get done. I
bet you're going to walk into the clinic and you're probably going to master the stairs within like 30 seconds of being there.
Right. That's what I felt.
Just going to put that out there.
Yeah, I'm going to look at him and go, can I run home?
Like, hang on. I'm just going to check in and I don't even need the therapist. Can I just go try out the stairs in the corner real quick? And they're going to be like, sure, dude.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're probably going to be skipping up 2 or 3 stairs. You won't even need to do the walking up. Yeah.
Well, he came in, and when he first came to my apartment, he looked at all the books. So he saw the Supple Leopard books. He said, "Are you a trainer?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a trainer. I teach yoga." And he's like, "Oh, this is gonna be a piece of cake for
So
me."
you're probably his dream client.
He knows when you got Kelly started on the bookshelf that you know a thing or two. So Danny, talk about the psychological aspect of this when it comes to rehabbing.
I think what Miles just said is literally like just the fact that he felt safe and seen and felt like, oh, okay, like, yeah, it doesn't have to be a big deal. I'm going to go do the thing later. Because the more we like magnify something as like this big thing we have to conquer, that's pressure. And some people do well under pressure. A lot of people don't. And most people put enough pressure on themselves to cave anybody. So I think just from like the neuroscience, I took a couple notes while you were talking about it, so I didn't mind. Our emotions and our pain are processed in so closely interrelated places of our brain. And our brain is so hardwired for survival that it is always going to take the option that's going to keep us the safest.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So your system, or if you've had pain with stairs in the past, people who listen to this, if you have pain with an activity, gosh, I can visualize a back squat and I can start to like kind of almost feel where I tore my adductor tendon. It's an experience that gets saved almost as this like neuro tag on our brain. So if you're someone who generally has pain with stairs and you look at some stairs, you're probably almost preemptively, your brain is probably almost preemptively starting to organize, hey, this is an event that leaves us feeling not great for survival. We're going to create this pain response. Yeah. Pain science is a really, really interesting, very evolving kind of field in terms of we're very much looking at pain now as more of an output from the brain as a result of all the input that it gets. And what I mean by the input is we have so many different types of receptors in our joints and our soft tissues and really kind of everywhere. All gets sent up to the brain. Brain kind of decodes it as like red, yellow, green light on a very macro scale. And on that yellow, red light, that's where pain is going to come. So a lot of times people feel like a mechanical sensation, clicking or popping or things like that, which I'm sure you probably felt in your hip at some point.
So you mean while we were doing the exercise today?
No, before your surgery, like the grinding or clicking.
Yeah, the clicking was the longest that I'd been through, and then the grinding later. Yes.
Now, did you used to feel that clicking with certain activities?
You know what? It was not activities. It was mostly if I sat on a bar stool, because you know how you sit on a bar stools are pretty tall, so the angle wasn't actually 90 degrees from thigh to torso. The angle was larger, so 45-degree angle, and then I'd get up, and then there'd be that click.
You could probably preemptively feel that click before you even started to move off that bar stool. Like you could probably.
I would always pause, knowing that okay, here it comes, and it didn't always come, but I would always pause. I would get off the bar stools a little slower, anticipating that little click.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So our brain almost creates these like little hashtags in terms of our experiences. I'm going to use that hashtag very loosely. Again, I'm giving a very like butchered version of like pain science, neuroscience right now. But when these experiences are processed so closely together physically in terms of location in our brain, you really do start to think about how much we're hardwired to preserve ourselves. And so if we're looking at the emotional component to pain, if you talk to anyone in business, they're going to ask about what's a business pain spot or that gap. That's their pain between where they want to be. It's not always a physical sensation, but I think that concept is very, very powerful for us in terms of our physical ability as well.
Yeah, definitely. I like how you talk about that. It's they're very closely related. In the brain. And we do create these associations, whether we're going into that movement and we anticipate movement. And if we've had pain before, I think we anticipate that movement and we try to move away from pain, right? That's part of the survival mechanism. You mentioned earlier on in the podcast that hurt pushes you to do something different. When you have pain, you tend to do things that are a little bit different. The human body is a fascinating mechanism that moves away from pain to keep moving forward. And sometimes that means that we have to change the movement pattern to avoid the pain. What are some ways that you help people to educate so that they're not moving away from former pain? Because like Miles is talking about, he's not going to be in pain with some of the movements or that he was doing before, because the hip is completely new. So there's not going to be the same pain there, but the body and the brain remember what it used to be. So can you give our listeners an idea of what could they do if they've had pain in the past? It's not there currently, but they're still stuck in this move away mentality. How can they start to break through that?
Again, on kind of a practical level, even though I think there's a large component of the brain that's included with pain, there's still a reason why the brain is giving that output, right? Now, sometimes, well, and I guess maybe a better way to say this is that the pain response from the brain isn't always an appropriate response, and it's not always given in an appropriate magnitude. So even if someone has, maybe they shouldn't, let's say someone has pain when they're going upstairs, you still need to work on the proficiencies or the capacities of the tissue. You still need to work on some of the motor control. You still need to look at the stability. You still need to look at all the other components that are going to come into whatever the injured area is. So if someone has pain in their hip with a back squat, you're still going to want to look at core control. You're still going to want to look at coactivation across multiple joints. You're still going to want to look at what's going on at the foot pressure. You still want to look at your ability to brace. You want to look at the loading pattern, because if you load ipsilaterally versus contralaterally, it's going to change the direction of like subtle rotation. So there's still these mechanical proficiencies that have to go into actually building into the other proficiency. And a lot of times, if someone has pain, basically what the brain is hearing is there's a lot of little stuff that might be a little bit off. It still needs to be worked on. And so I think it's important not to negate that.
Yeah.
And one of the kind of problems I have, for lack of a better word, with clinicians who are strictly down the pain science route is that you can't completely ignore the mechanical components. And I think if you're someone who, I want to come back to your original question, if you're someone who is dealing with pain, generally one of the great solutions, really, really easy, get stronger. And it sounds really dumb and very simplistic, but while there are so many people who will overcomplicate it, and again, I love the complex stuff. Like if you get me talking about the rib cage, I'm gonna go down a rabbit hole. Yeah. But when it comes to just fixing the problem, it really does come down to as simple as you can make it. And I think that's one of the things that I really loved about working with Justin too. The guy's got a master's degree in atomic physics. He's brilliant.
Yeah.
But when you go with him, right? Like,
yeah, we joked about that when he was on.
He's great.
Yeah.
He's a business partner of mine, another project we're working on too. You can have all the information in the world, but just because you have more information doesn't mean the solution has to be any more complex. So for most people, break it down. Find the smallest magnitude of something you can do to improve with that, and lateralize. If you have pain going upstairs, try maybe holding on and going down. Start working on just play with it. Be creative. Rather than thinking about the task, which is very much a binary, can or cannot, break out of the binary and start kind of thinking a little bit more creatively, a little bit more like kind of an amoeba, more of a flux.
I love how you talk about that. There's, the body's going to continue to give the signals of pain. And so oftentimes that can be the fuzz, right? It can be people nowadays don't understand what it was like when I was a kid and the TV would go out and then there's the fuzzy screen. Miles, right? Yeah. The Miles knows what I'm talking about, but there might be some younger generation like, whoa, no, it's all on the phone. But yeah, the snow on the TV where it was like, and you just don't have that clear connection. And sometimes that's what pain does, because it sits in the background and it continues to just send these signals. And so I love what you're talking about. Don't ignore them. Dig a little bit deeper and figure that out. But I also want to touch about what you said earlier about get stronger. I dealt with some chronic pain and chronic issues, joint issues over several years. And I finally saw a physical therapist that I just said, look, I've been seeing so many different people. I've got a background in corrective exercise. I don't understand what in the hell is going on. And he says, well, look at you. Like you've atrophied because you haven't used those muscles to the point where of course you're going to have a lot of pressure on those joints right now. And I said, well, I haven't done exercises to build those muscles because doctors and therapists have told me not to do that. He goes, so what the hell are you going to do now? And it was almost, it was one of those things where I thought, God, what have I been doing? Like, I'm an expert in this. I'm supposed to know this stuff. And immediately afterwards, I went to the gym and I started training those areas that I had been avoiding. And I was in pain until I got stronger. And I literally stayed in pain until I got stronger and stronger and stronger. And then as I got stronger, I have never had those issues again. And so I'm with you and cannot emphasize that enough from my perspective, my experience. The stronger you get, the less pain you will have because your joints, everything, all of your soft tissue just gets better when you get stronger. So absolutely love that.
I am so blown away that there are still clinicians out there telling people don't XYZ because we have so much freaking literature. Like we have so much evidence. It's inexcusable to say don't.
Yep.
Like that's not how the body positively adapts unless you're in an acute phase where the histology demands that you mobilize the tissue.
Right.
Right. That's again going to come back to first principles of what's the tissue, what type of tissue, because it's going to heal and scar differently. So you have to know what you're looking at. We could literally talk for, I mean, you just saw me get a little bit heated. We could talk for a long time about pain and tissue and how to go back to things, but it's crazy to me when I've got someone in person and they have a lot of pain and I'll just use myself as an example. If I've got something that's jacked up, like my right hip still gives me some issues because I have a tendon that's not attached anymore. The best thing I can do, I'll walk in and I'll train and I'll feel 10 times better after training than before.
Yeah.
And back pain is another great one where I've had a herniated disc in over 5 and still do what I do. I just pulled 425 for 8 reps last week. I'm about 150 pounds. So that's a pretty strong deadlift.
Yeah.
And I'm still doing all these things. And it's not because I have any sort of special knowledge or anything other than I just show up and do the thing. And I think looking at what you can do is probably one of the best ways you can start to get some of that strength back. But I'll go in and feel better after a session from a physical pain standpoint because you're giving your body and your brain the input that says we have the muscles firing. When those muscles are firing, joints are stabilized. When joints are stabilized, brain's usually pretty happy.
Yeah.
So I can't handle the can't narrative that people put on any physician, any provider that puts a can't on someone. Occasionally, the rare instance, maybe it's there, but we have so much literature and evidence to the contrary at this point. It's just negligent to put that on anybody.
Yeah, I agree. They've got to continue to educate.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of parallels in life too. When you think about we get better when we lean into where the pain is, right? We get better when we keep moving. And that's why I've always believed that a person's growth and evolution really starts with the body. If you're leaning into the work that you have to do and you continually do that despite pain, eventually the pain's going to go away. It's just like if you're uncomfortable in a relationship or you're uncomfortable in business because you don't know what the hell you're doing. As soon as you lean into that and you start to, put some work and effort into it, you get better at those things, and then the pain starts to go away. I think that the gym and training is a metaphor for life, and I believe that as you get stronger in the gym, you will get stronger in life, and you learn things that you just can't learn from a book. You can't learn the concept unless you put the time and the effort in, because the stronger you get, the more stable you are, the more consistent you will be. There's just so many parallels. Well, Daniel, we're coming up on some time here, but I want to make sure that we run through a few other questions with you because I think that what you have been through is really fascinating. I want to get a few questions away from PT and pain and whatnot, and I just want to focus a little bit more on you. One thing that you've learned in the last 3 years that excites you the most, what would that be?
We don't know the future, and that's amazing. How great. Don't know what's next.
Yeah. It's actually really exciting to think about.
It's a blessing, isn't it?
Yeah. It's very exciting. What is something that you know that most people don't and you wish that they did?
How to make the best chocolate chip cookies on the planet.
Oh, all right.
You think I'm kidding? I will send them out to y'all.
I was just going to say, I am texting you my address and I'm waiting for that. Why do people tell other people not to move when they're in pain?
They're not sure what else to say.
Great answer.
I think.
What is what's been one of the darkest days of your life, and then also what was one of the best days?
That's a hard one. Wow, I actually don't know how to answer those. I have some reflection to do.
Well, let me throw this out there. We talked earlier in the episode that we're going to have you back on. And so this is where I'm going to do a plug for our listeners. For the next episode that we have Dani back on with, we're going to do an Ask a PT question and answer. So as you're listening to this episode, I'm sure some things are sparking inside of you and you're curious what a physical therapist who can also deadlift, what did you do today? 400
I did 425 for 8 last week.
425 for 8 repetitions. So for most of the guys out there, she is way stronger than you. So Ask a PT is what we're going to put onto the next episode. So send us those questions now and we will start to bank those for the next episode. Dani, what is one thing right now that you are most proud of?
I'm just I really hope that people listening actually take up those questions. I'm totally deviating from the what am I proud of. There's so much possibility for y'all. And I really wish that whatever you're dealing with, whether it's pain, a belief system, whatever it is you're dealing with that you've been told is prohibiting you, even if it's self-told, please ask about that. Please.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're not getting away from what are you most proud of though? What are you most proud of right now?
Full transparency, 2022 was a year I just fell flat on my face. Everything.
That's something to be proud of.
But I am proud of that. I allowed myself to fail in a lot of things.
Nice. I think that is great because that means you tried some new things. You tried things that were probably outside of your comfort zone. Dani, who's inspiring you right now?
My husband and my coach, Justin. Justin Harris is awesome.
Awesome. Last question I've got for you. So at Evolve, we believe that personal growth and evolution happens over time. It doesn't have to happen fast. In fact, it most likely doesn't, but people need to start with one simple action. If you were to give our listeners one simple thing that you wish they could start today that would guide them on their personal evolution, what would it be?
Find your why.
And why is that?
If you're doing something without conviction, you're not going to be able to sustain it. You have to know that conviction in order to have the staying power to stay through the tough times. Because things are not, I mean, you guys know, no matter how much you love something, there's going to be a day you hate it.
Yeah. Anybody that tells you just find what you love and you'll never work a day in your life is full of shit, because there are bad days and there are challenging days and there are days where you don't want to do what you're doing. And so the why gives you that long-term purpose. Well, Dani LaMartina, thank you so much for an amazing conversation.
Yeah, man, that was really interesting. That was
really, very fascinating.
You are fascinating. You're just sitting here dropping different types of physics. I was not ready for that at 9:30 on Wednesday. I'm ready for it now.
Yes. I think one of the most consistent pieces of feedback that I get when we finish up a show, people message me and they're like, oh my gosh, Miles, I love that guy. In fact, I think you're engaged to one of our episode guests that lives in Saudi Arabia, right, Miles? Did you do our first online or podcast episode proposal?
Irina?
Yeah.
Irina Ivashchenko right now?
No, it is a joke. It is a joke. They just partway through, really Miles proposed to her. And I said, well, Irina, you're going to have to move from Saudi Arabia to Oberlin, Ohio now, or Miles, because Miles can't move away from his son. So, well, what a great conversation. And on that note, folks, it is time for us to wrap up another episode of the Evolve Podcast. We want to thank our guest, Dani LaMartina, for joining us, and my co-host, W. Miles Riley. Dani, what is the best way for people to follow your personal evolution and get in contact with you?
You can find me, you Google my name, my column in Elite FTS, as well as the website Team Troponin should pop up. You can also find me on Instagram at Dani LaMartina DPT, or email me Dani@teamtriponin.com.
Awesome. And we will put those in the show notes. So if you don't want to write that down, go to the show notes and you'll be able to click through and get to Dani from there. And hey, remember, folks, that it does take time and consistency to evolve. But first, you have to disrupt. And now it's time for you to get out there and evolve.
And evolve.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Evolve Podcast. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. And if you haven't done so, please give us a rating. As an independent podcast, it really helps us get more reach. This podcast is part of our mission to help millions of people evolve into the best versions of themselves. Please check out our coaching services at evolve-cast.com or pick up some of our Evolve merch. Until next time, keep evolving.